Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about amnesia that seems to creep into the historical timeline, because when you look at these buried levels, a lot of times people are just completely unaware of them. Even the native peoples, whether it's Native Americans or the Aboriginals, they seem to largely be unaware of these buried levels a lot of times. The first site I want to take a look at is Kendallville in northeast Indiana. 2020, they found more of these buried doors and windows, and we're told that this city was laid out in 1849. So again, it's given a fairly recent date, but during road work, they found these buried levels that nobody was aware of. And just a point of interest, the Underground Railroad apparently runs through northeast Indiana as well. And I just came across that while looking into Kendallville, just a point of interest. But I just grabbed a few snippets from the article talking about some of this road work in Kendallville, and one of the paragraphs was just talking about how officials are scratching their heads, and you also had the mayor as well as the redevelopment commission. They weren't aware of any of these entrances as well. And even if you go back into the photographic record, going back to the late 1800s, there are no photos that clearly show any sub-level entrances. So just once again, nobody's aware, yet they're there. And I think it speaks to this destruction that happened further back in our past, and it's just being covered up. And there's actually another site that was exposed lower levels in, I think, 2020 as well, and it's in Shelbyville, Illinois. And again, more of this road work that exposed these buried levels. But in this case, they said that it was used for coal storage, and I do believe that a lot of these buildings have been adapted after the fact, and they did use coal, and they brought the coal in through these lower levels. But I think that initially all this was just buried at one point, and it just been adapted after the fact. But that's my opinion. But I talked about Melbourne, Australia, 2017. They found all these buried blocks, and unfortunately, people just collectively forgot about it, even though it supposedly happened in the 1850s and 60s. And this is a major city, and it's in the central business district, so it doesn't seem very likely. But then if you go to the west coast of the United States, the Pacific Northwest, they find these buried Indian villages. And this was an article talking about the U.S.'s lost 2,000-year-old village. And in my opinion, they're painting the picture that there's this continuity with the Native American populations in the area. I don't think that's the case. And there was a mudslide that buried this particular village, which is indicated here on the map. But in 1970, a violent storm uncovered this Makah village that was buried by a mudslide. And one of the things of note with these excavations that happened after was that they found iron implements like chisels and knives that were discovered. And a lot of the iron to make tools wasn't readily available on the West Coast, so they had to come from outside influences. So we're told that a lot of this was associated with shipwrecks. But I think people were being visited on the West Coast by the Chinese, the Russians, the Spanish. But I think it happened at an earlier point than we're being told. And when you look at the timing of this village, when they say it got buried, you're going to find a mix of dates. So several say 300 up here, another 300, and then this bottom one says between 300 and 500 years ago, it was buried by all this mud. And I think the reason why they're throwing the 300-year date out is because there was this mega earthquake that happened, we're told, in the year 1700. And I think that whatever caused this event, I very well could have been an earthquake, but I think it goes back further than the year 1700. But I think why you're seeing 300 years mentioned as when that village was buried is because of this earthquake. I think they want to line up the dates of when it was buried with this earthquake, because this tsunami that they've now linked to this earthquake, that didn't happen until 1996. they've actually linked this tsunami with that earthquake in 1996, because when you actually look at this village, they made it a historic site and they wanted to add it to the National Register, and that application occurred in 1974, and at that time they said the mudslide occurred 500 years ago. But now, later, they've decided that this mega earthquake happened in the year 1700. In the 1990s, now they've linked it to this particular earthquake, the tsunami. So I think that's why you're seeing these varied dates. But there's all kinds of evidence for this destruction that they're associating with the 1700s. But I think it's much earlier. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is there is a mystery associated with this island in the South Pacific, the Isle of Pines. And the mystery surrounds all of these tumuli, these mounds, over 400 of these mounds that nobody's quite sure who constructed them, even for what purpose, because they don't find any bodies, they don't find tools. But what's also interesting about these mounds is they found within a lot of them these blocks of concrete within them. And concrete technology in the South Pacific was actually only introduced, we're told, a few centuries ago. So how do these mounds have this concrete within them when that technology didn't even exist? And I should mention here, once again, we're told there were the Melanesian peoples in this area, and we're told that they go back themselves upwards of 1,000 years. Yet they're completely unaware of any of these mounds, who built them. So once again, there's a lot of amnesia, even with the native peoples who were told were there for 1,000+ years. Well, what I find interesting is also what can be found on this island is the remnants of a penal colony. The ruins of this penal colony can be seen on the west of the island, and it was inhabited by prisoners, we're told, in the 1870s. Now, I think this penal colony might be a lot older than we're being told, because if we look at Tasmania, and I blew it up here underneath Australia, there is a site at Port Arthur, and it's a historic site, but it's one of these penal colonies. Again, we're told it was in operation early to mid 1800s, but I think it's much older and it looks ancient. But during excavations, I believe in 2020, they found these workshops. So there was traces of this early industrial period, and they found digging through clay like this upside down anvil. And if we go back to Melbourne and talking about all the buried blocks, they found, I believe it was an iron foundry. They were producing these steamships, boilers. So I think that there was this early colonial period, and they got up to a certain level of technology, and then there was some disaster, but it's earlier than the colonial period we're aware of. So when I see the remnants of this penal colony, just like Port Arthur in Tasmania, which I think is older, I think this site is older, and they probably had access to the production of concrete, and that might explain why you find all these mounds with concrete in them. But that raises another question as to why is there all these mounds? What was the purpose of this penal colony at a previous point, if indeed it is older? A lot of questions, but I think that the site is older. These sites are older. That's why we have all this amnesia, because we're being told these things are from certain dates and everyone's just shaking their heads. But in reality, I think they're much older. So that's what I think is going on. I should mention here, just point of note, is that there was a book written in 1668 called The Isle of Pines. And it's about this utopian civilization. There was a shipwreck of, I believe, a British person and 4 women, and they have a certain level of technology. But over the course of several generations, they lose all that technology. And it's just interesting that you have this lost technology on this island of pines with regards to the concrete. So I just thought that was an interesting note. I just wanted to mention it here at the end. But I think I'll leave it here for today. I did want to give a big shout out to my channel members. Thank you for all your help and support. Really appreciate it. As well as my patrons. Thank you as well for all your help and support. Once again, greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. So with that being said, until next time, take care. Bye.